Quite a few. Thanks, Susan. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all very much for joining this set of Climate Basic webinars. As we know, these sessions are mostly focused for entrepreneurs, but we've opened it for everyone, so open to the general public, so anyone can join and follow these sessions. They will also be recorded and they will be uploaded to YouTube in case you want to share with someone else or if you want to rewatch it. So a short introduction, these sessions are developed in collaboration with ClimateLaunchpad and they are possible thanks to IRISH-AID, which is the Irish government program for overseas development. So IRISH-AID and Climate-KIC, they have been working together since 2018 across many different climate innovation projects in Africa, Asia Pacific, and Latin America. And since 2020, IRISH-AID has had a climate unit dedicated to shape climate diplomacy, and they have focused on green innovation and entrepreneurship in those specific regions. So a short introduction about Climate-KIC. We are Europe's largest public-private partnership that is tackling climate change with the mission to innovate towards a net zero carbon resilient economy. So Climate-KIC is responsible for a range of different work across many areas of climate innovation, but in the startup and entrepreneurship space, we specifically focus on, we're working with different platforms such as Climathon, the ClimateLaunchpad, and the Climate Accelerator programs. And we also identify, support, and invest in entrepreneurs through every stage of innovation. So we help them move from the initial concept to scalable companies. So today's sessions is about designing adaptation and resilience business models for agriculture and forestry. As some of you might have joined last week, we had the introduction to Climate 101 and Adaptation 101. So today is a bit more specific on forestry and agriculture. And then the next two sessions, everyone is invited to join our diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then we'll be finishing this Climate Basics webinars with Blue Economy. So without further ado, I'll let Christine and Nick introduce themselves. All yours, Christine. And I think, Nick, you can start sharing.
Hi, good morning. Good morning, everybody. I'm Christine Rohrer from Climate-KIC. Yeah, and before I start to say something formal, I would really want to warmly welcome you all in this session. And to do a little icebreaker, let me ask you to type the location from where you are dialing into our chat, just to make us all really welcome and settle into the session. Okay, and I've already seen some familiar faces. Hi, Sarah, great to have you in the session. Yeah, excellent. Yeah, while the locations keep popping up, I'll just say briefly who I am. I'm Christine Rohrer. I work in the entrepreneurship team in Climate-KIC. I've been working internationally for most of my life. I'm Austrian, but I lived and worked abroad for 20 years before returning back home to Austria, from where I'm dialing in today. Yeah, so great to see you all from Uganda, from Brussels, from Germany, from Spain. Welcome. So let me give you some background how we came up with this training session. So basically, Climate-KIC has been around for now 15 years. And say in the initial 10 years, we were mainly focused on working in Europe. We had European funding, and this was our target location, target work area. But over the past 5+ years or so, we have continuously expanded the scope of our work, and we are now become much more a globally focused organization. And whilst initially we also focused much more on mitigation of climate change, over time we have also transitioned into adaptation, climate adaptation, and a resilience building, resilience building towards climate change. And in that context, in the past 3 years, we have actually run Climate-Accelerator programs focused on adaptation and resilience in Africa. And so last summer, and some of our audience know me actually from that exercise last summer, we did a training needs assessment. Basically, we spoke to entrepreneurs in West and in East Africa that had participated in our Clim Accelerator program previously, and tried to find out, what we had offered in terms of training, whether this was useful, and what was most useful, what was not so useful, and what would actually be needed. And in terms of what would be needed, the key message we got from climate entrepreneurs was actually, they wanted to know how adaptation and resilience innovation works. There was a huge demand for knowledge about business models, and people really asked us for examples. And this is why and how this course has come into place. And I'll now show you the team that actually is behind developing that course. So I think Nick will share the slides again. So we have myself, who has been in the design of this course. We have Ayub, who leads our work on the Tanzania Adaptation Innovation Cluster. We have David, who is part of the content team. And last but not least, we have been working with Nick Brooks, our lead author and developer of this course, who has decades-long experience in the adaptation and resilience space. So before I hand over to Nick, I'll of course be part of this session, and I'll be looking at comments and any questions you may have in the chat, and help facilitate the session. But before handing over to Nick, let me also emphasize some of the meeting etiquette for today. So if you can, please let us see your face. So if you can, please leave your video on. Our microphone etiquette: please mute yourself when you're not speaking. And if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand, or please drop a question or comment into the chat, and we'll monitor the chat and bring up your questions and suggestions. With that, and no further ado, let me hand over to our key presenter, Nick Brooks. Over to you, Nick.
Okay, thank you, Christine. Hopefully everyone can hear me loud and clear. So before I continue with the webinar, I'll invite Christine and Inez to interrupt me if they feel that anything needs to be clarified, if I'm speaking too quickly, and also if we want to take a break, for example, midway through. So I'm Nick Brooks. I'm based in the UK. I'm director of Garama 3C Limited, which is a small consulting firm focusing on adaptation, largely on international development contexts, but also in other areas. I've been working on adaptation for over 20 years now, previously with a background in academia and climate science. And I've been doing sort of consulting work with a lot of exposure to the private sector and international development contexts since about 2005. So that's me. As for the webinar, I'll just run through the contents and the structure. I'll obviously be taking you through this, and we'll be having a few exercises with some interaction and some interventions from my colleagues here. So the workshop is going to start with a review of global warming and its effects on climate hazards and extremes, to basically set the scene for talking about business models for adaptation and resilience. And the rest of the workshop focuses on the development of business models to support adaptation and resilience in the agriculture and forestry sectors. So first, we're going to look at some different business model archetypes, including common archetypes used in business and less common ones that are more relevant to adaptation and resilience contexts. Then we're going to consider who the customers of adaptation and resilience businesses might be, before looking at the business modeling process using the business model canvas. Finally, we may look at how adaptation and resilience businesses can characterize their impacts, but I think we might skip this. We have some sort of simple impact metrics that dotted throughout the slides. So in the interest of time, we might not cover that in detail, but we'll certainly sum up our key learning. And throughout the module, there are some short exercises designed to help us consolidate learning. So before we move on to looking at business models in detail, we're going to briefly review what adaptation and resilience business models are, and also what adaptation and resilience are, and why these are important. So a good place to start is with the climate change context, so we understand what it is we're adapting and being resilient to. So, as I think most of us know, climate change is driven by greenhouse gas emissions that are increasing atmospheric and ocean temperatures and are making most climate hazards worse. And by climate hazards, we mean climate and weather extremes and other potentially harmful variations and trends. So the icons on the left here represent some of the most important hazards that we're going to be considering that are made worse by climate change. And of course, these hazards interact with each other as well. So the hazards on the left can have a number of what we refer to as primary impacts, and these are the sort of immediate or direct impacts caused directly by the hazards themselves. But these primary impacts can in turn have secondary impacts, which are sort of the more indirect downstream consequences of the hazards once they've come into contact with human and natural systems. So there are many ways in which the hazards on the left can affect forestry, agriculture, and rural development in general. And we'll just run through a few of those to get a flavour for it. So, for example, climate change is making rainfall more variable and more unpredictable, and it's also resulting in higher temperatures and more frequent and severe heat extremes. So even if we have a context where rainfall isn't decreasing, more variable rainfall and higher temperatures mean that it's much more likely we're going to have a dry period coinciding with a period of extreme heat. And the consequence of this is to make droughts more severe, even if droughts aren't increasing in frequency. And of course, this has impacts on water stress and irrigation demand. So often we're seeing increased water stress and increased water demand at the same time, which is obviously an issue, a challenge in rural development contexts. Of course, hot, dry conditions also increase the likelihood of wildfires threatening ecosystems, homes, lives, and also agricultural areas and forests. Changes in heat and humidity can also alter the distribution and prevalence of pests and diseases. Climate change is also making extreme rainfall events more intense because a warmer atmosphere contains more moisture. So heavy rainfall and extremes such as hailstorms, of course, can severely damage crops as well as infrastructure. And in coastal areas, sea level rise is making storm surges more severe. So when you have a storm surge, it is likely to penetrate further inland and be more destructive. And of course, this increases risks to coastal agricultural land and can also accelerate the salinization of coastal aquifers and soils. So all of these hazards can clearly act to reduce agricultural yields and increase the risk of crop failures. Flooding can also result in the drowning of livestock. Extreme heat and drought can reduce livestock productivity and lead to the death of animals. Storms and floods can damage infrastructure such as roads, and wildfires can cut off transport routes, meaning that agricultural communities and rural communities are isolated from each other and from markets. They can't necessarily get their agricultural products to market in these disruptive circumstances. And of course, all of these hazards can have impacts on the post-harvest storage of agricultural products. Of course, more severe droughts, storms, and wildfires can also damage forest systems, as can changes in the prevalence of pests and diseases. And these impacts can all interact. For example, pests and diseases can increase fire risk by resulting in more dry, rotten, dead trees. Soft, waterlogged soils resulting from flooding mean trees are more easily blown down in high winds. So there are these complex interactions that feed back on each other. And where climatic zones are shifting north or south or to higher altitudes, existing agricultural systems, forests and ecosystems may need to shift with them. So agriculture and forestry as currently practiced may become less productive or even unviable in certain locations. And of course, forests and ecosystems respond to climate change through changes in species composition and diversity, and these may have implications for people who depend on certain forest and ecosystem products. So we might require different approaches to forest and ecosystem management, for example, involving the use and introduction of new species, which brings about all the challenges of bringing in new, possibly what might have once been thought of as invasive species to deal with new conditions. And of course, a lot of these hazards and their consequences are exacerbated by other human activities, such as unsustainable land and water use. And all can contribute to these sort of very downstream secondary impacts: food insecurity, poverty, with knock-on effects on health, education, and economic development. And ultimately, these hazards might contribute to things like displacement, migration, and even conflict and insecurity, although we have to recognize that the links between climate change, migration, and conflict are incredibly complex and contested. So hopefully that's given us a flavor of some of the challenges that we need to adapt to and build our resilience to. So to respond to these hazards and their impacts, we do need to begin adapting. We need to build our resilience. So let's take some time to think about what these terms are.
Nick,
I mean, yes.
Participants are asking for you to please slow down a bit.
Okay,
So
there you go.
I'm observing this in the chat, so you're a native speaker.
The first anticipated intervention, that's fine. Yeah. Okay, so I'll slow down. So put simply, resilience is the ability or capacity of people and systems to anticipate and absorb or cope with shocks, stresses, climate hazards and their impacts, and recover from their impacts. So historically, resilience was often seen in terms of bouncing back after a shock to the state that you were in before the shock. But of course, climate change means it's not enough to simply bounce back to where we were before we were disrupted or harmed by a climate hazard. We need to think about how we can be better equipped to deal with these hazards in the future. The nature of climate-related shocks and stresses is, of course, changing. So this requires adaptation, which involves adjustments to systems, practices, and behaviors that enable us to survive and function under new conditions. So resilience and adaptation are often used as sort of interchangeable terms. They're often not defined very well, if at all, and people often don't pay much attention to the relationship between resilience and adaptation. But I think if we think about, who's adapting or who is resilient, what is it that we want to be resilient or adapt to, over what timescales, then this becomes much clearer. What we're really talking about here is making ourselves more resilient to climate change. So we're talking about resilience in the longer term, and in the longer or the medium to long term, resilience to climate change must involve adaptation. So adaptation is a part of resilience in the longer term. It's a crucial aspect of resilience, and it contributes to resilience as we look to the future. So given the need for us all to adapt and build our resilience to climate change, there are actually some huge opportunities here for innovative businesses that can support resilience and adaptation and identify ways of turning adaptation and resilience responses into successful business models. And this is what we're going to focus on for the rest of this webinar. So what is an adaptation and resilience business? So adaptation and resilience businesses have certain characteristics, and the products and services that they provide can do several things. First, they might help to address systemic barriers to adaptation and resilience, for example, by strengthening their customers' ability to understand and respond to climate change risks and impacts. Second, they might directly reduce climate-related risks and impacts for customers, for example, on important assets, their economic activities, or the impacts on people and natural systems. So they reduce risks to things that we value. Third, they might reduce the costs of climate change for their customers. This might be the costs resulting from losses and damages, or it might be the costs of navigating climate change and responding to it. At this point, it's worth sounding a note of caution, though, and that relates to the concept of maladaptation. So any actions taken in response to climate change need to try and avoid risks of maladaptation. And this occurs when actions taken to reduce risks, often in the short term, actually end up increasing them, usually in the longer term. Examples might be flood defenses that build higher and higher flood protection systems, and these offer protection, in the short to medium term against rising waters. But when they do fail, they fail much more catastrophically, and the risk is greater, and the impacts are greater. We might also look at irrigation. This might be an obvious and sensible measure in the short term, where we're dealing with increased water scarcity. But if irrigation results in the expansion of water-intensive activities and actually accelerates the decline of water resources, there might come a point, again, at which the system catastrophically fails. So we can also have examples where adaptation responses simply transfer risks from one group to another or one area to another. For example, we might look at examples of the building of dams or reservoirs that displace certain groups who then become much more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. So the risk has been transferred onto one population, and they have suffered at the expense of the adaptation option. So that's a brief interlude just to sound a caution about maladaptation, but let's move on and see what resilience and adaptation businesses can do to help their customers. So another thing that adaptation and resilience businesses can do is to build what we refer to as these different resilience capacities for customers. And so we define 4 different resilience capacities. The first is anticipatory capacity. This is the ability of people or institutions or other systems, including businesses, to anticipate, prepare, and plan for climate hazards and their impacts. And this can be facilitated through the provision of services such as weather and climate forecasts, and these can aid agricultural planning and scheduling, as well as other activities. So we can sort of make sure we're doing our planting, our sowing, our harvesting at the best time in terms of what's happening with an increasingly unpredictable climate. The second capacity is absorptive capacity. This refers to the ability to resist and cope with the impacts of climate hazards. So, for example, we might make infrastructure more robust so that when a storm or a flood occurs, it's less likely to damage infrastructure. Might also involve changes in behavior so that people are less affected by extreme heat, for example. The third capacity is adaptive capacity. And this is the ability to adjust to actual or potential changes in climate and their impacts, or potentially, as the IPCC puts it, to take advantage of opportunities and also to respond to the consequences of those impacts. So an example of adaptive capacity might be changing the types of crops or the varieties that we grow, so we have faster growing crops to cope with shorter growing seasons. Finally, we have transformative capacity, which is the ability to change the fundamental attributes of a system in response to climate change, to make it more sustainable or viable under new conditions, or to actually shift to alternative systems and behaviors. So where adaptive capacity is about maybe making smaller changes to existing systems, transformative capacity is about shifting to new systems entirely. So we can think of anticipatory and absorptive capacity as things that are sensible for us to do, even if climate wasn't changing. These would make us better able to cope with things like variations in rainfall, drought, storms, floods, things that happen anyway, regardless of climate change. Adaptive and transformative capacity are more about doing things that we really only have to do because of climate change. So Climate-KIC has developed this thing called the climate causality framework, and this is designed to sort of help adaptation and resilience businesses and startups to sort of think through the process, think through the chain from hazards through impacts to adaptation and resilience responses or innovations, things that might be turned into business models. So in any given context, we're going to face a range of hazards with a wider range of impacts, and each of these impacts will be associated with multiple potential adaptation responses. And impacts and the appropriate responses will vary across sectors, livelihoods, population groups, economic activities, and social, economic, and environmental contexts. So what we have here is some examples of climate hazards with some of the impacts of those hazards and some examples of the types of things we might do to respond to those hazards. So when we're using the climate causality framework, the first step is to try and understand what the important hazards are. What are the hazards that are causing the greatest challenges for our potential customers if we're a business? How are these being made worse by climate change, and how might they evolve in the future? So starting by identifying climate hazards that are affected by climate change ensures that your business model is going to be adaptation relevant. So if we focus on agriculture, here we've identified delayed onsets to the rainy season, extreme rainfall, and a shift to hotter, drier conditions characterized by more frequent droughts and reduced soil moisture. As some examples of the types of hazards we will commonly face. Once we've identified the key hazards, we need to think about what the impacts are. What are the impacts for our potential customers? How do these affect populations, infrastructure, the natural environment, livelihoods, economic activities? How do they affect your potential customers, including other businesses? And how do the impacts vary across different groups and types of business? So in this example, the impacts include loss of seeds or early stage crops following planting, the disruption of crops and loss of livestock due to extreme rainfall, and a general erosion of productivity coupled with an increased risk of crop loss throughout the growing season as conditions get hotter and drier. And in the longer term, under this third hazard, the impacts might include crop and livestock systems that exist today becoming simply unviable. So let's look at the types of adaptation innovations we might choose to respond to these hazards and their impacts. And this is the third step in using the climate causality framework. So given the impacts, what can we do to address those impacts, to reduce them, to negate? So the examples we have here include climate information services in the form of things like forecasts, and these can help growers with agricultural scheduling to reduce the risk that crops are lost because of increasingly unreliable rainfall. This is about building anticipatory capacity. Ooh. We might also look at weather-based insurance, crop and livestock insurance, so farmers get a payout based on losses, or if climatic conditions cross certain thresholds under which losses are likely. Weather-based insurance, we'll talk more about this a bit later. And this is really building absorptive capacity. We might look to environmental management, so management that essentially improves the health of soils and water resources, for example, increasing infiltration of rainwater and reducing runoff to reduce the risk of flooding when we do have extreme rain. Again, this is building absorptive capacity. We might look to new crop varieties, new types of crops, again, drought-tolerant, shorter-growing crop varieties to build the adaptive capacity to cope with these shifting climatic conditions, or to entirely new crops and production systems to build transformative capacity, for example, in the face of shifts to hotter, drier climates. So I think once or twice I've mentioned products and services, and businesses need to think about what it is they're actually offering to help individuals, organizations, businesses, and other actors to adapt to climate change. So typically we talk about businesses offering products and services, and it's important if you're establishing a business to think about whether you're offering a product, a service, or a combination of both. So we have some quite specific definitions of what products and services are. A product is typically described as a tangible item that is offered to consumers. This means products are physical items that the purchaser or user owns and that might be traded or exchanged. Obvious examples of products are items of equipment. We might think of things like solar pumps or irrigation systems, technical equipment, but they might also include consumable items such as drought-resistant seed, the livestock breeds even, resilient construction materials, and so on. Services are typically described as intangible items arising from the output of one or more individuals that are consumed at the same time as they are produced, and they're often tailored by the provider for consumption by specific people or organizations. So typical examples might be training or advisories. These might be provided through mechanisms such as agricultural extension services, training courses, and so on. Climate intelligence is often viewed as a sort of third category of something that a business will provide, but I think it's probably best viewed as really a subset of services relating to the use of data and information that can help customers identify, monitor, and assess climate hazards and also their impacts and their adaptation responses. Climate intelligence can help us track how climate hazards are evolving. It can help us anticipate and characterize future climate risks and plan adaptation responses and track their effectiveness. So examples of climate intelligence include short-term and long-term seasonal forecasts, longer-term climate projections, and real-time monitoring of climatic conditions. So of course, the boundary between products and services is not always that clear-cut, and products and services are often combined. So on this side, we see some examples of items that can be clearly categorized as products or services. For example, on the product side, we have items of infrastructure, again, examples like solar pumps, we have drought resilient seed, drip irrigation systems, physical things that are sold and installed or used by consumers. On the services side, we have examples such as weather-based insurance, agricultural advice, water monitoring information, business linked producers with markets, or provide capacity building and training. But of course, there's this overlap. We might have, for example, the provision of a data platform, something that is sold as a product, which might be bundled with a software subscription, a service. We might have soil or crop monitoring systems, which are sold as products, but combined with advisory services. We might sell insurance along with seed. So again, combining products and services. When we're looking at climate intelligence, again, we can think of, this is quite heavily service-based. We might have forecasts, climate advisory services, and early warnings on the services side. We might also have products in the form of things like climate bulletins or updates, or physical infrastructure for early warning systems. And then in the middle, we might have things like climate modeling and projections, which can be services that are combined with products such as reports, climate scenarios, which again might result in an output, which is some sort of written or electronic product. But the development of that scenario might be done in partnership with a client or customer as a service. Similarly, we might have climate change action plans where we have an output, which is a plan, but where the process of developing that plan involves a business providing services to the client who wants to do the planning. So we're going to take a little, I would say break, but perhaps pause, shall we say, for the first exercise, just to help us think through some of the things on the last slides. So in this exercise, we're going to try and identify some products and services that a business might market to address one or more climate change impacts that are relevant to the agriculture and forestry sectors. So what we have here is a version of the climate causality framework with examples of 2 hazards, each of which is associated with a set of impacts. And for each set of impacts, we'd like you to think about some possible adaptation and resilience innovations and identify some potential products and services that could support one or more of the 4 resilience capacities. Of course, some of you might already be developing products and services or working for businesses that are trying to support adaptation and resilience. But in this case, you can think about how these might fit into the climate causality framework. So take a few minutes to come up with ideas for products and services, and then we're going to come back and run through a real example of a business that addresses some of these hazards and impacts. So I should probably hand over to Ines and Christine. Maybe you have some input on how we can do this in terms of timing and so on.
So the idea was to send you in groups of 3 to 4 people. Ines, is this okay?
Yes, we can make it of 3 or 4 people.
And Ines, Nick and I will hopefully be able to visit the different groups. Before we put you in groups, let me suggest that you take a screenshot of this slide so you can take the instruction for the exercise with you. Once you are in the group, let's first start with giving you 5 minutes. If that's not enough, we can add another 2 minutes, but we'll see from being in the groups with you. But as we still have time, please take a screenshot so you have the instruction in your group. Are you ready, Ines, to transfer us?
Yes, I have it. Just waiting for people to take a screenshot. If not, we can also paste it in the chat.
Perfect.
And if anybody wants to see any of the previous slides, I can always go back and they can screenshot those.
Okay, I'll open the breakout rooms. How long should we give, Nick? What do you think? Okay, let's do 10 minutes. And almost everyone is in the room, except, yeah, Fabio and Jasmina that said they can join.
Hello, I'm gonna join now. So can you put me back in the room, please?
Let me see.
Maybe I can just click on it. Okay.
Yeah,
Here
you
it
can
is.
click on
Thanks.
it. Susan, do you know how to put a timer?
Yes, I've done this
Always
before.
helps.
Somebody asked for help. Do you get the pop up as well? In room 5, people have a
no.
question.
No, I don't get it. I mean, I might go to room 3 and tell Christine.
We can change her.
Uh-huh.
Move to room 5. You see that? Shall I do
Yeah.
it?
Yes, go ahead.
Nice. Okay, timer. I think it's here.
Whenever I post in the chat here to everyone, it also gets to the breakout rooms, right?
I'm not sure.
Mm.
Hmm.
Nick, I also believe you can jump from room to room to see if anyone has a question.
Okay, I'll do that. Yeah, I just need to
Let me know if you
manufacture
can. I think you
short
can,
break.
but
Yeah, okay.
maybe go to room. Well, just try.
I see Christine's in room 5. So I'll jump into room 2. Why not?
If you want to have a timer, you should install an app. So it's like an
Fine. Yeah.
edit thing, unfortunately.
It's okay. We'll be back. I'll say it at 11:50 and then see if they're ready.
Yeah. And then if you close the rooms, you can also give like 1 minute time or something. So they
I
can
give
round
a
off and they
warning.
give like a, yeah, they have like a pop-up. And it
True, true.
says, your room will be closed in 1 minute or something.
Slowly, yeah. They're just in breakout rooms right now. Just so you know, don't get scared. It's only 4 people.
Hi, Ines.
I'll broadcast that we're joining back in 2 minutes. Okay, I'm gonna close the rooms.
Did
Here
it
we
make
are.
any sense, Nick, to you?
Yes. Yes.
Because
It
I
did.
didn't even get a chance to like get feedback from you. As
Okay.
people are returning from the breakout rooms, it
Yeah.
really means a lot.
Yeah. That,
get
it
that.
made sense. It's a good explanation.
Sorry,
Thank
guys,
you.
I got internet off and went out of my breakthrough room.
So I think some of us had constructive conversations in the breakout rooms.
Yeah, sure. We had some constructive. I was in a room with Maria and Mary, and Nick also showed up. Hi, Christine.
Yeah, hi Arnold. Really good to see you. Arnold is one of the entrepreneurs who was in our Clim Accelerator focused on adaptation and resilience until recently. So good to see you here. Would you and others want to report it back from the breakout room and offer an example? Why don't you go ahead, Arnold, right away?
Okay. I can go. I can go just right away. So my name is Arnold Shoko and I'm an entrepreneur. I normally call myself a climate entrepreneur because our works upcycle organic waste into sustainable materials by using macroorganisms and insects. So we recently did a climate causality framework assessment tool with Christine. And the climate hazards identified in our business were land degradation and biodiversity loss. Now, we are combating the use of the excessive use of inorganic fertilizer, but also conventional protein feed sources, which in its preparation, you get to degrade the land, you get biodiversity loss because people have to overfish and even overfish more. But also people need to clear the forest for them to have huge soya plantations. But also they need to destroy a lot of the land, dig more mines for them to extract materials for the synthetic fertilizers, inorganic fertilizers. Now, the impact of the hazards, as I was describing the problem, is lack of food security because our target beneficiaries are smallholder farmers. Now, if these people don't have the resources ready for them to help them farm, literally they will not be able to produce, and it puts the country or the farmers at a risk of food security, but also unproductive and degraded soil. If we continue doing what we are doing now, in the next few years, we'll not have productive lands because we are now at a point where we have overused inorganic fertilizer, and it affects the soil quality, it affects the soil conditions. So we are at a risk of having unproductive and degraded soils. But again, at the center of this is farmers' livelihood at risk. This is a very important aspect of the impact of the hazard because to begin with, these smallholder farmers participate in activities for them to earn money, for them to make a living. So if we are building, we are not creating ways for them to adapt and become resilient of the current situation, these farmers' livelihood is at risk. Now, with our adaptation in innovation at Lima, we are offering an affordable alternative protein feed ingredients, which is derived from black soldier fly larvae. I hope most of you know of the insect. If not, I'll just have time to explain more about the insect. This is an insect.
Arnold, let me stop here. I know your adaptation innovation, and it's great. But right now, all the participants have focused on the example which we have on screen. So if we have a chance, we could later invite you to also show your, climate causality framework, because I think it's difficult for our participants to follow your narrative and looking at the slide that actually looks at different impacts, which we just used for the purpose of the exercise. Sorry to interrupt you here.
No problem.
So I think let's, in the sake of time and in the sake of all the participants who in the breakout rooms focused on that exercise, let's go back to the exercise and focus on what we have on screen, while maybe later being able to invite you. Nick, would you like to take over from here?
Sure, yeah. And just to give some feedback on what Arnold was talking about, to me, this seems like a very good example of something that can enhance absorptive capacity in particular. So maybe we'll have a chance to revisit that later. So I have prepared an example based on a real business to illustrate this exercise. And so to illustrate some of these adaptation and resilience innovation, we're using this example of a company called IRIHub in Kenya. So IRIHub sells dam liners, solar pumps, drip kits and components. It also sells greenhouses, net houses, and vertical garden kits, and various starter packs, which it sells to individual farmers, smallholders. So essentially, it's selling infrastructure that contributes to absorptive capacity, helping farmers cope with dry periods and droughts. So I think one of the interesting things when we start looking at real examples is we find that they don't necessarily just address one capacity, and these capacities sort of overlap. I think one thing we can say about Area Hub in terms of products and services is it's very heavily focused on products, and probably focuses mostly on absorptive capacity. But it might also contribute to adaptive and transformative capacities, where it allows farmers to change their growing practices in response to climate change. For example, greenhouses and net houses allow crops to be grown in more controlled conditions, where they're protected from pests and diseases. And these pests and diseases themselves might become more prevalent under climate change. And going back to the products and services issue, if we're looking at things like installation of some of these products, then this is an example of a company that, while it's heavily focused on products, probably does provide some services. So we can see the climate causality framework for Area Hub. We have drought, variability, pests, diseases, with clear impacts of crop losses and ultimately reduced productivity and enhanced or increased food insecurity. And the adaptation innovations allow farmers to sustain their yields and to protect against pests and diseases and so on. So again, quite a simple example, but hopefully it illustrates some of the things that we've been talking about. So this is a good point at which to start talking about business model archetypes in some detail. And we're going to focus on archetypes that are particularly relevant to rural development, agriculture, and forestry contexts. Now, business model archetypes are essentially different types of business model based on different mechanisms for generating profits and for delivering goods and services, or products and services. And so we're going to look at some of these archetypes and illustrate them with examples. And again, if I start talking too quickly, now I'm aware of the time running along, please do pull me up and let me know. So here we have 4 very common business model archetypes that are widely acknowledged in the general area of business development. They're not specifically related to adaptation and resilience, but we can apply them to these adaptation and resilience contexts. So we're going to show some examples of businesses that support rural development and agriculture and forestry based on these models as well. So the simplest of these is provide on demand. This involves the delivery of products and services to customers in line with demand, and the value for the company selling the products and services is extracted from direct sales. And so for adaptation and resilience, this might involve the sale of equipment like we've seen with the Area Hub example that increases resilience, things like drought-tolerant seed, climate and other advisory services, but also these items of infrastructure that Area Hub and other companies provide. The next example, or the next archetype rather, is razors and blades. This involves the sale of a core product at a low price, with most of the value being extracted from the sale of non-durable parts that are used in conjunction with that core product. I guess it's self-explanatory, but you buy the razor, which doesn't cost too much, and then you have to constantly replace the blades and can spend huge amounts of money on the blades. So examples relevant to resilience and adaptation might include systems that, again, have non-durable parts. So we might be looking at things like water purification systems that have replaceable filters, for example. Product financing involves the leasing or rental of a product over a period of time, and at the end of that period, the customer owns the product. So a typical example is basically a mortgage on a house. Part of the regular lease payment is a fee, and part is a down payment on the product that you're buying. So again, this might be applicable to larger items of equipment, such as larger scale water and irrigation systems. The subscription model, again, fairly self-explanatory and probably quite familiar. It involves a recurring, for example, monthly revenue based on a fee or payment generated when customers pay for the regular delivery of a product or service. So again, this might be applied to things like weather and climate forecasts and other information such as services such as agricultural advisory. And so all of these models or archetypes are seen in adaptation and resilience businesses, including those relating to the sectors that we're concerned with today. So let's look at a few examples. Here's an example from Kenya in the form of Farmer Lifeline Technologies. And this is a business that sells solar-powered scanners for farms that detect pests and diseases. So once the device detects an incidence of a pest or disease, the farmer is sent an alert and advice about what interventions to pursue, for example, applying pesticides and fertilizers and where the farmers can buy these. And then data are also sent up to the company's analytics dashboard, where they can give a sort of more aggregate view of what's happening in terms of pests and diseases, which can also inform policies. I don't think we're going to have time later on to talk in detail about impact, so it's worth just highlighting on some of these slides. We have examples of some quite simple impact metrics, for example, number of monthly customers, number of direct beneficiaries, and so on. And we'll flag these on some of these examples. So the capacity addressed by Farmer Lifeline Technologies, I think, is mostly absorptive. It helps farmers to cope better with the incidence of pests and diseases. But it's also potentially adaptive, again, because these may change as a result of climate change. So this service would help farmers to keep pace with changing risks from pests and diseases for their crops. And again, if the data from detectors across large areas indicates long-term changes in the prevalence of these pests and diseases, then this innovation might also be contributing to adaptation on the larger scale through informing policy that can help farmers better address these risks. So again, it's a product, which is the scanner, with a service in the form of these advisories. And so we can sort of see this in terms of a razors and blades or subscription style model, a bit of a hybrid of both, really. You're buying a product and then you're buying a service that goes along with that product. Another example here is Agrixtech. This is in Cameroon and Senegal, and it provides an example of the financing model, business financing and product financing. And it provides microfinance to agro-pastoral projects in these countries, and projects are eligible for finance if they pass an evaluation based on an online risk assessment. And Agrixtech claims that the producers, it supports are 2.5 times more productive than average. This company also provides training to community members to become land agents, generating new customers and earning commission. And again, we have some examples of some impact metrics here. So it's not clear from the information that's available whether or to what extent Agrixtech's assessments directly address climate change hazards and impacts, but they do certainly represent a mechanism that could be used to ensure that such risks and impacts are considered in the design of agro-pastoral initiatives. For example, making finance conditional on risk assessments that use climate intelligence is a good way of integrating adaptation into investments into these projects and making those projects more resilient and therefore productive. So while the details of the risk assessment process are not really clear from the website, we can say that this model does have the potential to support absorptive and potentially also adaptive and transformative capacities if it uses climate intelligence appropriately to drive those sort of adaptation and resilience innovations. Another example, Agritech Analytics, this one also from Kenya. And this is an example of the subscription model. Agritech Analytics is a company that provides soil and crop monitoring services to farmers through a very explicit subscription model. So data from satellite remote sensing and solar-powered soil and crop sensors are used to monitor soil moisture, crop health, and other variables, and then alerts are sent to farmers to help them optimize irrigation and other inputs, and also to take action if any pests and diseases are identified. So again, it reflects one of the earlier examples we've just seen. So the business model combines products in the form of crop sensors and services in the form of monitoring and alerts with elements of climate intelligence related to soil and crop conditions that are certainly affected by climate. And it contributes to both absorptive and adaptive capacity by enabling farmers to respond to the climate-related changes and potentially to cope better with more variable and unpredictable climatic conditions. So let's now move on to some other archetypes. These are, again, some other quite conventional business model archetypes that are perhaps less common than the ones we've already looked at. But some of them are actually, quite relevant to adaptation and resilience. So hidden revenue is a more complex model in which the main revenue for a business comes from a third party that cross-finances the provision of a product or service to potential customers. So in conventional contexts, this might be like a news service provided to consumers that's funded by advertising. So the business actually makes money not from the product by selling it directly to the consumers. It makes money when people click on adverts, for example, from a third party. So we might see this in adaptation and resilience context, where a business, for example, is paid by a third party, such as a government or a development organization, to provide services such as early warnings or extension services, or weather forecasts or advisories. So again, it might not necessarily be charging the customers. That revenue might come from somewhere else as a sort of public good model. The freemium model, again, probably familiar to most of us, is where a business offers a basic product or service at no cost, and then it charges a premium for more advanced services. So again, this might be applicable to climate information services, for example, basic weather forecasts at no cost, with more detailed, perhaps tailored forecasts and advisories available as a premium service. Franchise model, I think maybe not so common in our contexts here. It's one where one business, the franchisee, pays another usually much larger business, the franchisor, to use its trading name and operating system. But this model might be applied to things like the sale of climate resilient seeds, agricultural inputs, consultancy services, based on some sort of proprietary model or approach, for example, to risk assessment or adaptation planning. The marketplace model is, I think, potentially much more relevant to us in terms of adaptation and resilience in rural development contexts. And this is where a business provides a physical or virtual space or platform or other mechanism that links buyers and sellers of products and services. So linking producers with markets and buyers is quite a common theme in development and resilience interventions. And it's something that could be facilitated by businesses, by startups. And we'll see some examples of this over the coming few slides. So I think probably the marketplace is the most common model in adaptation and resilience contexts, with the others being a little less so. So, oops. Okay, so here's an example of the marketplace model. It's Meridia, which is based across the Netherlands and Ghana. And this is a company that deals in supply chain traceability. So what Meridia does is it generates data that enables smallholder producers in sub-Saharan Africa to comply with EU sustainability regulations on deforestation-free products. So Meridia's business model can be characterized certainly as a marketplace business model, enabling smallholders to access EU markets through regular data-driven verification. And there's also a subscription element here where smallholders pay for regular data and verification services. So interestingly, Meridia isn't directly addressing climate change hazards and impacts. What it's doing is it's helping producers to absorb the impacts of the responses to climate and ecological issues in the form of more stringent regulations intended to reduce deforestation. And so it's important to recognize that there are opportunities for businesses not just to directly address climate hazards and their impacts, but also to address the changes in policy and changes in market landscapes that result from the way everybody else is responding to climate change. And I think this is quite an important point. And so businesses like Meridia effectively allow regulations in markets like the EU to translate into more sustainable practices in external producer regions by enabling producers to comply with these regulations, assuming that it works as intended. So I think this is quite an interesting example. Abelobi is another good example of the marketplace model. And Abelobi is a South African organization that uses technology to help consumers source sustainable products from small-scale fisheries. So again, while it doesn't directly address climate change impacts, Abelobi helps small-scale fishers to enhance their economic and food security, and it encourages sustainable fisheries management, which contributes to the wider resilience of fisheries and ocean ecosystems. So we can see it as contributing to the absorptive capacity of fisheries and the transformative capacity of fishing communities in terms of livelihood by value addition and market access. So let's move on to still some other archetypes that are potentially much more directly relevant to adaptation and resilience that we might not see so much in other contexts. So what we've got here is some other less common archetypes that I think are really, really worth highlighting. Aggregators bring together small producers to increase their efficiency or allow them access to markets, services, and resources that they wouldn't normally be able to access, potentially because of prices, costs, or other barriers. So we can already see a potential overlap with the marketplace model here. And examples might be entities that provide microfinance and insurance to smallholders by negotiating with larger financial institutions on their behalf. Contract farming involves small-scale farmers being contracted by a larger organization to grow a particular crop or variety of crops. And typically, farmers will be provided with inputs for the growth of these crops, and the costs of those inputs will be deducted from sales of crops at the end of the season. And the contracting organization typically agrees to buy the produce at the set price, again, deducting those costs at the end once the farmers have sold their products. Risk sharing is mostly in the form of insurance, with insurance premiums from a large pool of customers being used to pay the small, hopefully small subset of customers that do experience losses over a given period. Typically, these are going to be losses of crops or livestock in our context, or financial losses due to damage to infrastructure resulting from climate hazards. So insurance might be organized commercially on a large scale, or maybe on a more local basis, for example, through cooperatives. And cooperatives do represent another potential business model that we should be aware of. Social enterprises sell products or services that directly or indirectly serve a useful social purpose, such as providing employment or improving livelihoods or food security. They might employ local people to produce products such as handicrafts or agricultural products for sale based on resilient and sustainable materials and practices. And so there's often a lot of overlap between these models, and we'll see that in some of the case studies that are coming up. So this is an example that I came across when I was doing some work assessing a UK-funded project in Kenya a few years back. And it's quite a nice example that combines a number of these more resilience and adaptation focused archetypes. So this is real solutions. And it includes elements of aggregation, contract farming, and marketplace. So real contracted smallholders who previously mostly grew maize as a subsistence crop, and it contracted them to grow sorghum and other crops such as peas in mixed cropping systems. And it involved a shift from maize, which was increasingly struggling and challenging as a crop because of a shift to more unpredictable, drier, hotter conditions. And it involved a shift to things like sorghum, which were actually indigenous crops that cope much better in these conditions. And it did this by having agreements with East Africa breweries for the production of sorghum that went into their producing low-cost beer for the domestic market. So Real was sort of acting as a contractor, but also as an aggregator and a broker in the marketplace, providing agricultural inputs and acting as a reliable buyer, linking smallholder producers with a major commercial market. So it supported, I think, most pertinently adaptive and potentially transformative capacities. And it's adaptive because maize that was grown before in this area was less viable under drier and more variable conditions. And so the sorghum is more drought tolerant. It's transformative in the sense that it allowed farmers to move away from maize and subsistence to other crops that are grown commercially, transforming both production and their livelihoods. Another East African example, and most of the examples we find are sort of focused on East and Southern Africa for some reason. This is Acre Africa in Tanzania, and it's an example of risk sharing through insurance. So what Acre does is it bundles agricultural insurance with seed sales and input sales, and also with loans taken out by smallholders to purchase those seeds and fertilizers. So essentially, the financial institutions providing the loans pay the insurance premium, and that's repaid by the farmers as part of their loan repayments. So when the farmers purchase the seed, they register the insurance via an SMS message sent from the field location where that seed will be planted, and that links the insurance cover to that specific location. Acre then use remote sensing data of rainfall to identify when the rainfall at that location falls below a certain threshold, at which point this triggers an insurance payout. and farmers can opt to receive that payment as a direct money transfer or as a discount on their next purchase of seed or fertilizer. So again, this enhances their absorptive capacity to cope with rainfall variability and crop and seed losses. Sheka Textiles, again from Kenya, is a really interesting example, I think, of what I describe as a transformative capacity intervention. So Sheka is another business that blends aspects of different business models as well. It's a social enterprise that engages smallholders to produce silk from the eri moth, which is used to make high-quality textile products. So Takesha employs local people to produce those silk products. And the model is essentially a contract farming model in which Takesha provides growers with frames and eggs from which they grow and produce the eri moth cocoons. And then Takesha buys the cocoons as the raw materials for silk production. And so there are aspects of aggregation and marketplace here too, as Takesha brings together smallholder farms to generate a large volume of silk and effectively links them with textile markets and also employs people to make those textiles. So I think this is a clear example of adaptive capacity for a number of reasons. So Takesha shifted from cotton to eri moth silk because cotton was becoming increasingly difficult to grow, again, due to drier and more unpredictable climatic conditions. And smallholders, again, were previously highly dependent on maize, which was also failing for the same reasons. And the eri moth caterpillars feed on the castor plant, which is native to Kenya and is very, very drought resistant, meaning that this whole supply chain becomes more resilient for both the smallholders and for Takesha itself. So this is basically a model that's based on a transformation in the crops that are grown and in the raw materials and supply chains that underpin the business. And it also resulted in an economic transformation for the growers who earn a lot more from this model than they did previously from their other, often largely subsistence-based activities. So I think this is a really interesting example. Excuse me. So it's time for another exercise. This should say exercise 2. Apologies for the typo. So in this exercise, we'd like you to look again at the adaptation and resilience innovations, the products and services from exercise 1, and think about what sort of business model archetype or archetypes you might adopt for a business that's selling those products and services. How do you go about actually selling those products and services? So again, remember, there's quite a lot of overlap between the different archetypes. So your business might have characteristics of multiple archetypes. So again, it's just taking what you've done already in exercise 1 and trying to think what business model archetypes would be appropriate for that and why. So again, I'll hand over to my co-hosts to facilitate the management of the breakout rooms and to jump in if they want to say anything.
Yeah, so not every group, in my observation, not every group actually came to a conclusion in the first exercise. I mean, we had some options coming up here and there, but for everybody, I mean, here we actually have the exercise 1 completed, and there are 3 adaptation / resilience innovation. So the one thing we would want to find a business model to sell is irrigation to sustain crops and yields. Another company would want to sell reservoirs for water storage during dry periods and to support irrigation. And the third company would want to place greenhouses for controlled growing condition and protecting crops from climate hazards, pests and diseases in the market. So I suggest that before going into the breakout group, just note down one of those 3 products you would like to use to, in your group, think about the appropriate business model. I hope I have explained that rightly. So now, Ines, if my recommendation is actually to make the groups a little bit bigger, 5 to 6 people, so that we have a minimum of 2 really active participants, because in my experience, some of you also have to be in a workplace where you have to be quiet and you can't speak up. So let's make the group a little bit bigger and let's get together for 5 minutes and think about, reflect on what we have heard about the business models and think about how we would place the proposed products in the market.
Okay, I'll do maybe either 3 or 2 breakout rooms. So maybe I'll do just 2, and then we can be 7.
The archetype's name?
Okay, that's a great suggestion.
Yeah.
Nick,
Because
would you,
we
from
might
your
know them, but
slides, would you
Yeah.
just
mind
pass through the
typing
archetypes.
the archetypes into the chat?
Okay, yeah, great. Okay.
I'll then do
So we
2
have
breakout rooms.
quite
Sorry,
a
it will
lot
be
of
7.
archetypes. I will type them in. I'll just quickly put the archetype slides back as well, and then I'll type them into the chat. So I think also for this exercise, we can also think about how we might combine products and services as well. So if you're focusing on a product, what services might you bundle with that? For example, installation, whatever. So
Nick, why don't we do the following? Let me suggest that you just, we stop at this archetype slide for half a minute and invite people to take a screenshot.
Yeah, okay. I'll also type them in, and then if people want to refer to the chat, they can.
Yeah.
So.
And that we also then go to the common archetypes number 2 and do the same.
Yeah, okay.
This will lead to a more meaningful conversation in the groups.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you so much for the suggestion.
Okay. Shall I move on to the next archetype slide now? Or are people still screenshotting?
Screenshots are taken?
Just a minute.
Okay, let's move.
Okay, they will be in the chat as well. So obviously here you have a bit more detail. So
so here, if you can take a screenshot, then you have more information than just the headline.
Mm-hmm. So I've typed them into the chat as well. I've also put in brackets at the end, cooperative and public good, which I think I mentioned briefly, but we haven't got any specific boxes for those in the slides. But I think, again, there'll be other business model archetypes, I'm sure, that we can think of. But these are some of the most common and most relevant ones for our context.
Before we go back into the groups, Nick, could you go back to the exercise instruction?
Of course, yeah.
Just quickly.
Okay.
So remember, three different products. Choose one, and then think about that in your breakout group. I think we are ready. We should be ready for the breakout groups.
Perfect. I'll open 2 breakout rooms so we can be 6 or 7 people per room. And then we'll be back. How long? 10 minutes?
Let's take 7.
Yeah, because we are quite pressed for time, I think, now as well. So.
So 7 minutes.
And Nick, Ines, and I will join the different groups.
Yeah.
I'll join room 1. Is that okay?
Yep,
Good.
I'll join room 2. Oops.
Yeah, I think welcome back, everyone.
Do we want to invite anybody to just very briefly give a bit of feedback, or shall we move on to the example?
I think in my group we had 2 concrete examples. Mohammed, would you like to share one?
Oh yeah. Well, one of the suggestions that I said, and I think I would like to stick to it, is to combine both on-demand and product financing by providing like immediate installation and emergency repair services for irrigation systems, and also allowing customers to finance the purchase of the irrigation system over time, making it accessible to more farmers and businesses. So that's what I think.
That sounds great. So it's a good and very concise example. So, okay, shall we move on, because we have actually very little time left. So I think we're going to have to skip over quite a few of the following slides, but I think I have an idea of what we can jump over and focus on. So just to go back to our Area Hub example, to help us think through, the business model archetypes. So again, Area Hub operates a straightforward provide-on-demand model in which agricultural infrastructure products are sold directly to smallholders. And I think as we've seen in the discussion, certainly in my breakout group and in the other breakout group, there is potential for Area Hub to use elements of other business models, for example, subscription or razors and blades models, where equipment does require regular maintenance or the use of perishable components. Also, there might be further potential for the hidden revenue business model. For example, if a local or national government or other actor subsidizes the business to sell products at significantly reduced cost to smallholders, and this might happen in the context of development programs, for example. But I think also this idea of blending the on-demand for product financing with the specific example of irrigation also illustrates the flexibility here and the different possibilities for businesses doing this sort of thing. So I think very briefly, let's just think about the different types of customers that adaptation and resilience businesses might be selling to. Apologies for the abbreviation to A&R businesses. I meant to not do that. So I think just very briefly, I'm going to summarize and not dwell on a lot of the examples on the following slides in the interest of time. But broadly speaking, I think we can divide potential customers into 4 groups, broad groups. We can first look at individuals and individual households, which include individual farmers and smallholders. And these customers will, buy affordable products, for example, small-scale equipment, insurance, seeds, other agricultural inputs, for example. They might also receive services such as SMS forecasts, alerts, and advisories. The second category of businesses of customers we might sell to is other businesses. And these might be small businesses that might have a bit more spending capacity than households, right up to large commercial enterprises requiring more expensive and resource-intensive products and services. So these might include consultancy services, data, large-scale equipment and materials, and so on. And smaller businesses might buy services that improve their access to markets. But both small and large businesses, I think, will be interested in services that link them to supply chains and producers. So again, marketplace type models and distributors or consumers. Another category that we might sell to is governments. These might include national and local governments, municipalities, and so on. And I think there'll be quite a lot of overlap here with the type of products and services that we might be selling to larger businesses, particularly things like consultancy services, data, infrastructure, things that help with planning, and so on. Governments might also contract adaptation and resilience businesses to implement projects and provide public goods, such as early warnings and extension services. And in the final category here, we have other bodies, which is a very general description, I guess. But we might think about other bodies in particular that are active in the adaptation and resilience arena. particularly in rural development contexts for our purposes. And so these might include multilateral and international organizations. They might include research bodies, NGOs, and other organizations that might be implementing adaptation and resilience projects. And again, these might require similar services, so the ones that are required by governments. They might also pay adaptation and resilience businesses to deliver public goods. So again, they might contract businesses to engage stakeholders, actually linking with the local communities that these organizations set out to support is going to be hugely important, and often it's not done as well as it could be. So there are huge opportunities there to improve things. So they might pay for engagement services, the conducting surveys, and so they can reach large numbers of individuals or households through their adaptation and resilience actions. So the role of the business might be to act as an intermediary or broker. So we have got some more detailed discussions of how we might sell to these individual customers. I'm not going to dwell on those in the interest of time, but I might just flag a few examples. Another Kenyan example is EasyTech Farm Solutions, and this sells services directly to farmers and smallholders. It focuses on climate smart farming infrastructure and consultancy. And it links this to the sale of hydroponic and irrigation systems and greenhouses. So again, delivering products with services. And the focus here is on coping with droughts and dry periods, supporting absorptive and potentially adaptive capacity. Another one here, subscription model, Kamaza. This is a forestry example, so it's worth just looking at this as we had a lot of focus on agriculture so far. So again, Kamaza targets individual smallholders in the forestry sector with services that support smallholder forestry as an alternative to large plantations, with the aim of expanding forest cover and supporting local livelihoods. And this is done through a subscription model based on a tech platform that monitors forest crops and delivers expertise to smallholders and connects them to markets for forest products. Jumping to some examples of selling to other businesses, AgroSmart in Brazil, so a rare Latin American example, which is welcome. This is a business that sells to other businesses, in this case, larger agribusinesses and cooperatives, among others. And it's developed a number of tech platforms that are accessed via apps, which integrate forecasts, custom alerts, and telemetry from field sensors. So again, this idea of field-based monitoring linked to data processing and associated services and advisories. So AgroSmart provides subscribers with digital field notebook, regular reports, and a means to remotely manage irrigation. It also produces vegetation maps and farm-level forecasts and provides guidance on the application of farm inputs such as pesticides and fertilizers, using things like wind forecasts. So there's a strong emphasis here on predicting risks and opportunities, including in supply chains, so it supports anticipatory capacity, and this is more focused on larger businesses. Examples of selling to governments, Intergems in Sierra Leone provides consultancy services focused on hazard and risk mapping, disaster management informed by climate information, early warning systems, and data collection. And it provides these services to government departments as well as to development agencies. So this also doubles as an example of a business that sells to these other actors. So examples of the services Intergems has provided include environmental impact assessments, data dashboards, and support for the development of national monitoring and evaluation systems. So again, it's targeting predominantly anticipatory and adaptive capacities through a conventional provide-on-demand model for these larger customers. An example of selling to other actors is Esoko in Ghana, and this provides a range of digital services to a variety of customers, including farmers and agribusinesses. So we're looking at weather forecasts, agronomic advice, market linkages, price information, insurance services delivered via SMS and call centers. But it also provides data collection and profiling services for development organizations. So again, as I was talking about previously, this role of acting as a broker, for example, to support social protection programs. So we're rapidly running out of time. So I'm going to very quickly try and squeeze in the business modeling process. So we've looked at different business models and different customers. So how do we go about planning and implementing our business model? Oops, bear with me.
Nick,
Okay.
you can, I suggest you go slow so people can really follow.
Okay.
If we don't go through everything, we'll just have to do another webinar at some point.
Yeah. Okay.
But we'll let you go until 12:55, and then we'll ask our audience to provide feedback, because we really would like to have feedback on
of course.
this session, because as I don't know if I said it at the beginning, this is the first time we are actually holding it, so this will be very valuable. Just a heads up on the timing, and then we'll finish at the hour sharp.
Okay, great. I'll try and go slow, but not too slowly that we don't get anything else fitted in. So, okay, so when we're designing our business model, once we've identified the template or the archetype we're going to follow, we need to ask ourselves a number of questions about what that business is going to do. And so some of this is a recap of what we've already addressed. We need to ask what risks, what hazards and impacts we're addressing. We need to ask which groups we're supporting. So who is affected by these hazards and impacts? What are their needs? How can our business help them? And therefore, from those groups, who will our customers be? Are we selling directly to individuals, households, businesses, or other actors? And what is it that we're selling? Are we selling products or services? Are we selling climate intelligence, or a combination of these? What's our revenue model? How is our business going to generate revenue while also addressing these risks and needs and really supporting our clients and customers with their adaptation and resilience actions? And of course, we've got to think about whether what we're offering is affordable by the customers we're targeting as well. So how do we develop and implement our business model? And this is where something that you may be familiar with already comes in, the business model canvas. And this is a widely used tool for developing business models and businesses. It consists of 9 elements, and they're shown here in a standard version of the canvas available via Wikipedia. It's probably far too small for you to read, so I've got a few little animations here to try and illustrate various elements. So the canvas enables you to think about different aspects of your business, the resources and relationships that are required, how you create value, how you engage with your customers, and how you're going to deliver your products and services, and how the business will generate revenue. So hopefully I have time to quickly run through these 9 elements, and then we probably have to stop to get some feedback. So let's just do that. So a good place to start is the value proposition box, which is just here. This asks what we're doing for our customers, what products and services we're delivering, and which customer needs we're satisfying. And interestingly, the canvas explicitly lists cost reduction and risk reduction under value proposition characteristics. So even in a very generic form, we have these very direct links to adaptation and resilience. And it's under value proposition that we set out what risks we're addressing and how. And for adaptation and resilience businesses, we can do this in reference to the climate causality framework and the resilience capacities that our business is supporting. Moving next to revenue streams, this is where the canvas relates to the business model archetypes that we've been discussing. So which archetype or variant of an archetype is our business model based on, and what's our revenue model? Remember that our model can combine elements of different archetypes, multiple archetypes. Under customer segments, we set out who our different customers are, and whether we have different types of customers. For example, are we selling products to a mass market, a niche market, or a segmented market in which we can bundle customers into a number of different groups based on their shared characteristics and needs? Are we looking to a diversified approach based on expansion into different markets to minimize risk by ensuring we're not dependent on a single market or type of customer? In other words, are we ourselves looking to our own resilience by diversifying our customer base? And this might be the case for a business selling something like water treatment, harvesting or storage products to a combination of domestic and commercial customers, where there are differences in scale and ability to pay. Once we've identified our customers, we can look at what kind of relationships we want with them. For example, are we providing highly personalized or customized services, or are we providing products that require minimal after-sales service? In adaptation and resilience contexts, customer relationships might involve mutual learning around resilience and adaptation outcomes, and also the co-creation of resilience and adaptation responses to evolving hazards and risks. So the closer relationship we can have with our customers from an early stage, the better we can understand their needs. And I think this is critically important in understanding the highly contextual nature of resilience and adaptation. We have a box here called channels, and this addresses how we reach our customers. They're the channels through which we reach customers and deliver our products and services. And these include the means through which we raise awareness about our value proposition, the channels through which we deliver value and enable customers to buy our products and services. So links to revenue models and archetypes in terms of, for example, product financing. So there's potentially quite a lot of overlap between the relationships and channels boxes. So we've looked at the boxes on the right, and these are focused more on the delivery of value to customers. And the boxes on the left of the canvas are focused more on what we need to run our business ourselves. So these include the key activities box here, which addresses production of products and services. It includes, how we actually make and deliver what we're selling, problem solving, the development of platforms and networks to support delivery of our value proposition. And in terms of resilience and adaptation, key activities are going to include the identification of climate change hazards and impacts and risks, the development of effective responses to these risks, and the promotion of awareness of climate change risks and our value proposition to address them. Key partners include things like our suppliers, the same for all businesses, but also other stakeholders in these resilience and adaptation contexts, such as local communities and organizations that can help us understand evolving risks and needs. Organizations working on climate change issues that might inform our understanding of issues such as how hazards might evolve in the future, what data are available and how we should use them, and so on. And partners might also include sponsors who can provide finance in the form of loans or grants. These might be development organizations or governments wanting to support, for example, private sector involvement in adaptation and resilience. Examples would be Climate-KIC. So, key resources include human, financial, physical, and intellectual resources. And all of these are going to be important for adaptation and resilience businesses, but we might single out intellectual resources to understand and respond to climate change and related hazards, impacts, and risks as being particularly relevant here. And finally, I think under cost structure, we consider fixed and variable costs, which are important for planning and forecasting, as well as things like economies of scale and scope, which might influence how our costs evolve over time. Economies of scope occur where a business integrates different activities, for example, the provision of climate intelligence with the generation of climate data and information, rather than, for example, paying to access that data and information from a third party. Under cost structure, we also consider the cost-driven versus value-driven aspects of our business. So a cost-driven business focuses on minimizing costs for itself and for its customers, for example, through the sale of lower-cost products that are relatively cheap to produce for a mass market. In contrast, a value-driven business aims to create and maximize value for its customers and might provide a more tailored and expensive service to a smaller customer base. So in terms of adaptation and resilience, a value-driven business will create this value by helping its customers to navigate climate change hazards, impacts, and risks. So that's a very rapid run through the business model canvas. If we were to have time, we would have another more detailed exercise on this. I think probably we can't fit that in today, but as this is a pilot, first time we run this, it's a learning exercise, and so we will think about whether to extend this webinar in terms of time in the future or condense the content. I will quickly skip through that and just very rapidly for 30 seconds or so, just try and wrap up some of the key learning and then we can get to feedback. So things to take away that I hope you can take away from this webinar. Adaptation resilience businesses can use the climate causality framework to identify innovative products and services to enhance their customers' resilience capacity. So this idea of using the framework to enhance your customers' resilience capacities is critical in terms of demonstrating relevance to adaptation and resilience. The second key takeaway is that we have a multitude of different business models and archetypes relating to different value propositions and ways of delivering those services. We have a lot of conventional business model archetypes that are relevant to adaptation and resilience, but we also have some less common archetypes that are particularly relevant to this area. The design of our business models is guided by key questions relating on how products and services can be delivered to build those resilience capacities, and we can use the business model canvas to address those. Another thing that's important is engaging with our customers is really key to develop a shared understanding of the risks related to climate change and how business will actually help to address those risks. And one thing that we haven't really covered in detail, but that's also important, is that you're able as a business to demonstrate how you will build those resilience capacities and have an impact. So how will you measure your impact? I'll stop there. Sorry, that was 1 minute over. But I'll hand over to my co-hosts to facilitate the feedback.
No worries.
Thank you all very much.
I think you deserve a virtual applause, Nick. Please, can everybody applaud? We have a button on the bottom of the Zoom. We have a button where we can share our applause. Thank you very much, Nick. And to all the participants, please stay on for another 3 to 4 minutes and do give us your valuable feedback. We have a little survey Ines will launch shortly.